At 5 years old, I was a brat. I could admit that. But in kindergarten, I got a wake-up call. I only wanted things because the other kids had them. In this case, it was a carton of milk at nap time. Chocolate milk to be exact. I already had my own a few hours earlier, insisting to the teachers that I would get sick if I didn't have my milk before others. Really though, it was to prove that I was Miss Morris's favorite. I remember my milk was plain and refreshing, and perfect just before a nap. I drank it so fast that I remember feeling my gut jump into my throat. The truth is, I wasn't even thirsty. But when the other kids were given their milk after me, the fact that Elizabeth Mara's carton was chocolate made me thirsty again. I remember my mouth would not stop watering. It's not like Lizzie was quiet about it. Her mother had brought it in as a special gift. My mom never brought me special gifts. It wasn't fair, I kept thinking. Lizzie had held the carton like it was gold, squeezing onto it with bright blue eyes, lips pulled into an excited grin. Okay, first things first. 5-year-old me did not like Lizzie. The girl's hair reminded me of chewed up cheese, a long mess of blonde curls tied into pigtails. She was the class princess, always dressing up in her Sleeping Beauty dress and doing twirls for the teachers, while they happily laughed and clapped. When I wore a princess dress and did a twirl, the teachers smiled blandly and nodded. "You're very pretty, Claire." It was still a compliment, but Lizzie was told that she would marry a prince and live happily ever after. And part of me longed for the girl's hair. There weren't any Disney princesses with red hair. Well, there was Ariel, but Ariel was a fish. It wasn't the same. I didn't want to be a fish. Every time I tried to be Aurora or Cinderella, the other girls would tell me to stop, pulling off the blonde wig and throwing it into the toy box. It was back when red hair was seen as bad or whatever. I just didn't understand why I wasn't allowed to be the princess that I wanted. According to the other girls, I was too ugly and mean to be a princess, and not nearly as beautiful as Lizzie. During dress-up day, the whole class applauded when Elizabeth had pretended to cast a spell, magically making brownies appear on a tray. I wasn't stupid. Everyone knew fairies lived in the forest, and didn't set foot anywhere else. And besides, I had seen Mrs. Mara sneak up behind the girl and pass her the brownies, while the other kids were distracted by the cloud of glitter that had supposedly come out of her wand. I remember thinking if Elizabeth was a real princess, I hoped that she would kiss a frog and become an ugly, scaly creature and live in the town pond forever. I would take her crown, or rather, the sparkly tiara that she always wore to school, and live happily ever after. That was my hope, at least. And now, my immortal enemy had chocolate milk. 5-year-old me burned with envy. It was the type of drink I only got on special occasions, whether that was my birthday or someone else's. The fact that Elizabeth was waving around something so special, so valuable, it made my blood boil. I wanted that chocolate milk, and I would get it, because I always got what I wanted. According to the rules, I wasn't allowed to wear my mother's long red dress. It didn't exactly fit, but with some adjustments done by me when I really shouldn't have been using scissors, cutting off the frills and some inches off the skirt, it was wearable. Miss Morris told me that I couldn't wear it, so I screamed and threatened, telling my parents, until the teacher gave in. It's not like my mom and dad were rich or held any influence, but of course I thought that. I wore the outfit with pride, holding my head up high and smiling my best smile. In my mind, it was so much better than a princess dress. Even with the teachers, I always got what I wanted. I had watched the girl from a distance, pretending to be embroiled in my crayon drawing of Elizabeth's untimely demise. A lot of the red crayon was used, since Elizabeth had been eaten by an evil dragon. I didn't take my eye off of the chocolate milk until playtime was over, and the other kids were grabbing their cartons of milk from a tray sitting on the teacher's desk. Maybe it was a miracle that Miss Morris had asked to speak to Elizabeth outside the classroom. It gave me the perfect opportunity. So, dropping onto my hands and knees and crawling across the playroom, shoving toys and books out of the way, I reached the tray of milk on the teacher's desk. There was one carton left, Lizzie's chocolate milk. The other kids had retired to the floor, curling up on the multicolored beanbags while Miss Morris helped Polly Jane pick out a storybook. Lizzie had come back inside, but she was rifling through the toy box, no doubt looking for the teddy bear that she always slept with. I took my chance. I didn't think that I would have one better. I reached out and swiped the milk off the tray. It felt amazing in my hands, cool and refreshing. There was a cartoon picture of a smiling tooth on the front, which made me smile. My mouth watered. "All right, everyone," Miss Morris sang. "Find your sleeping buddy and lie down." I didn't have a sleeping buddy. I didn't need one, I thought. Teddy bears were for babies anyway. I hid the milk in my dress pocket and I was shaking with excitement. My plan was to wait until everyone else was asleep, and then I would drink it, and it would be the best milk that I had ever tasted. I would savor it, and then I would dump the carton on Lizzie's desk, along with the drawing and sign my name in bloody red crayon. It was perfect. I was still laughing to myself when a squeaky voice made me jump. "What are you doing?" Turning around, I found myself staring at two boys. I automatically recognized the speaker from the whistling noise. Felix Harper had lost his front tooth the week prior, and every time he spoke through the ginormous gap in his teeth, I had found it hilarious. Not to mention his strong Aussie accent. In my 5-year-old mind, the boy was practically an alien. And there he was, Felix Harper with his partner in crime, Nick Salmon, Lizzie's friends. Like the blonde, the boys weren't exactly my favorite people. I was constantly mistaken for being Felix's sister, thanks to the boy looking almost identical to me. He just didn't share the color of my hair, which I hated. He also had pasty white skin and freckles speckling his cheeks, just like me. Anyway, I told him in the past to make his hair a different color, but he just told his dad, and I got chastised. But I wasn't being mean. I didn't think Felix deserved to have red hair like me. He was popular and I was a freak, so why was I bullied and he wasn't? And besides, I liked my red hair. In my eyes, the color was beautiful. It was the late evening sunset in the summer. Springs of warm orange and mellow red coming together, streaking across the sky, glittering with dying sunlight. Sometimes I would glimpse Felix's curls catch the light, transforming it into an inferno, a bright, flickering ignition of my favorite color. It wasn't fair that he had my hair, and it wasn't fair that he refused to change it. Felix was frowning at me, his own crimson curls falling in narrowed brown eyes. He was hand in hand with Nick. The two of them had been inseparable since they were babies. Felix was one thing, being Lizzie's prince, but Nick was so much worse. I didn't like him because, well, I thought he looked weird. He had a big nose like Pinocchio and crooked teeth. I liked to make fun of him, making him cry, but he got all butthurt, telling Felix that he would yell at me. Nick used his best friend like a shield. He wasn't exactly rich, his clothes were always too big for him, and he didn't speak to anyone except Nick and Lizzie. The two boys looked mismatched in front of me, Felix with his brand new Spider-Man shirt that he wouldn't stop talking about, and Nick in oversized overalls and a sweater. But they both had the same expression: suspicion. Nick kept sneaking glances at my dress pocket, and Felix had his arms folded, lips curled with distaste. I glared back at them after gathering myself. "None of your beeswax," I shot back, clenching my fists by my sides, sliding the thin material of the dress between my fingers. I cocked my brow at Nick. "What do you want, big nose?" Nick sniffled. He gingerly rubbed his nose, casting his eyes to the ground. "Stop calling me mean names." Felix nodded. "Yeah, and you took our friend's milk." I went into defensive mode. "No, I didn't. Liar, liar, pants on fire." Felix shook his head. "We saw you, Claire. It's in your pocket," he said matter-of-factly, the gap in his teeth making whistling noises, and I couldn't resist giggling, smirking at the boy. "You sound funny, Felix." The boy stamped his foot, brown eyes flashing. "I can't help it. Give Lizzie her milk back." His tooth whistled through the pronunciation and he held out his hand, but this time I laughed. He wiggled his hand, tapping his foot impatiently. "Now." Nick nodded, his lip quivering slightly. "You stole Lizzie's milk because you're jealous," he said, "like a jealous witch." "What?" Tears sprang to my eyes. I hated it when people called me a witch. "I'm not a witch." "Yes, you are," Felix said, his red hair exploding into hues of pretty reds and oranges when Miss Morris turned the nightlight on. I hated it. "You're an evil witch who stole the princess's milk." He exchanged a cruel smile with Nick. "Give it back, Claire. Evil witches don't deserve chocolate milk." "Yeah," Nick giggled. He squeezed Felix's hand tighter and they made a swinging motion. "A big-nosed witch." I staggered back, tears filling my eyes. Stop calling me a witch." "A witch," the boys chorused, giggling. I felt something like acid bubbling and burning inside of me. It scorched my skin. Pressing my hands over my ears, I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the boys were stumbling back with wide eyes, and the rest of the class were looking over, an assortment of confusion and amusement on their faces. "She really is a witch," Felix gaped. "Throw her in the pond." Nick joined in laughing. The two started chanting, "Throw her in the pond! Throw her in the pond!" I screamed louder, jumping up and down. I couldn't stop myself. Their taunts had set something off inside of me. "Stop! What on earth is going on?" Miss Morris came over, with a confused-looking Lizzie in tow. Nick and Felix were silent, and I stopped screaming, but tears were dribbling down my cheek. I didn't want to cry in front of them, because then they would have won, and I wouldn't let that happen. Lizzie joined her friends quickly, pressing her head to Nick's ear, where he no doubt had told her that I had stolen her milk. But Elizabeth didn't look angry. She just whispered back to the boy, the two of them giggling together, stealing glances at me. I swore that I heard the word witch and my eyes teared up again. I was about to tell the teacher that they were being mean, which they definitely were, but Felix was already standing on his tiptoes, eager to tell the teacher first. "Miss Morris," he whistled through the gap in his tooth, tugging at the woman's patterned dress. The teacher looked taken aback. "Miss Morris, Claire stole Lizzie's milk." "Excuse me, Felix, what was that?" The boy shook curls from his face, and I remember wanting to punch him. "She did it. She hid it in her pocket." Miss Morris looked horrified, while the kids looked smug. The carton of milk suddenly felt a lot heavier in my pocket. "Now, Claire, is that true?" Miss Morris held out her hand, her expression strict, her usual kind green eyes creased with irritation. Give it back, please. That milk is for Elizabeth. Despite her expression, her words were soft. I felt my cheeks go tomato red, especially when I caught the three of them giggling together behind Miss Morris's back. The boys were pulling faces, moving in jerky motions pretending to be a witch. Elizabeth didn't join in, but she didn't tell them to stop either. I told myself that I would not cry. I wouldn't cry in front of them. Miss Morris, I pointed to them, choking back my sobs. They're pulling faces at me. The teacher didn't even look around. Just give it back, Claire. That milk is specifically for Elizabeth. Come on, sweetheart. Do I need to call your mommy? No. Mom hated coming to school to sort out disputes. She specifically told me not to bother her unless I was the one being bullied, which was practically every week. My mom had no choice to come if other kids were harassing me. But if I was found being unkind to another kid, it was a different story. I shook my head, delving into my dress pocket and pulling out the carton. I handed the milk over without a word, and the teacher nodded, turning and giving the carton back to Lizzie, who grasped it to her chest. The boys automatically honored her, as if they were really protecting her, as if they really were her princess. They would never protect me like that, I remember thinking. To Felix and Nick, I was the ugly witch. That's right, Miss Morris smiled brightly. Claire, what do you say? I stuck on my tongue. My eyes were still stinging and my cheeks felt like they were going to burn off. I hope you get eaten by a dragon. I spat at the boys, as well as Elizabeth. And I hope the dragon poos you out into a pool of lava. Claire, Miss Morris exclaimed, and I winced. I hated it when the teacher raised her voice. I'm going to give you one last chance to apologize to Elizabeth, okay? We don't steal. If we want something, we ask. I'm sure if you asked to share it, Elizabeth would have been more than happy. Right, Elizabeth? I'm sure the four of you can still be friends. The blonde nodded eagerly, waving the carton in the air excitedly. Yes, Miss Morris. Wonderful, Miss Morris exclaimed happily. Claire? I glared at the ground, refusing to look at either of them. It had taken everything in me to even look at her. I'm sorry for taking your milk, I whispered. The teacher beamed. Well done, Claire. Now that wasn't so hard, was it? With a last smile at Lizzie and the boys, she joined the other kids, rounding them all up. Nap time. Get your buddy, please. I was left with the three of them, and suddenly it was so hard to breathe. I expected them to run off to the others and join in with the growing group of kids curling up for nap time. But Lizzie, Felix, and Nick stayed in front of me. Lifting my head, I tried to smile at them, but it was more of a grimace. My gaze found the milk still in Lizzie's arms, and my mouth watered again. After thinking so much about the chocolate milk, I really was thirsty. Lizzie was frowning at me, her blue eyes wide, lips curled, while Nick and Felix glared. Their eyes were piercing, twisting my gut. I took a small step back, and giving them space. I thought that would make me look less evil, less like a witch. Could I still have some of your milk? I smiled with meaning for what must have been the first time. Normally, I smile to get my own way, but I really wanted to share something with them. I was envious of how close the three of them were. Maybe I wanted to be a part of them. To my surprise, Lizzie nodded eagerly. Sure, tearing open the carton. The girl gulped on half of the carton and swiping her lips, giggling, before passing me the carton. Here. Really? I could barely contain my excitement. I reached out for the carton, ready to laugh in glee, to thank the girl for accepting me into her group, finally. But before Lizzie snatched it back and drank the rest, and I had watched, my stomach twisted into knots. The girl drained the carton, every last drop. But I couldn't keep it anymore. Staring at the empty carton, warm tears splashed down my cheeks. All gone. Lizzie laughed before turning to me. Maybe I was seeing things like when I saw fairies in the garden, but the girl's eyes looked alive, writhing with fairy dust, like she really was a princess with magical powers. I swallowed hard, stumbling back when the girl advanced towards me. "Chocolate milk isn't for the witches," Lizzie murmured, "and you're an ugly witch." The boys looked shocked for a moment. I don't think they were expecting the girl's cruel words, but Nick quickly got over it. "She's right, Claire," he sang. "If you drink it, you could turn into a frog. We're saving you." Felix nodded with his own mischievous smile. He cocked his head. "Do you want to turn into an ugly toad, Claire?" "No." The more they said it, the more I started to believe that I really was a witch. No, I'm not a witch." The words were popping from my mouth before I could stop them. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to rip out Lizzie's hair, and then Felix's tooth. I wanted to make them hurt, like they had hurt me. I couldn't resist narrowing my eyes and pulling my teeth back like an animal, snarling at them. Felix jumped back. He grabbed Lizzie's and Nick's hands and pulled them away, laughing. "She really is a witch. Come on, Claire's going to turn us all into frogs." Nick giggled. "Protect Princess Elizabeth." They ran off, laughing and falling over each other, before curling up with all the others. I stood there for a long moment, glaring at the floor. I clenched my fists. "Don't cry," I had told myself. Mom said crying was weak. I couldn't cry. I squeezed my eyes shut and stamped my foot. There it was again, that feeling. The feeling that took over me, burning hot and scorching. I wish something bad would happen to them. I wished a real dragon would come and swoop down and take them far, far away. I wanted bad things to happen to them. I wanted them to hurt like I had. I wanted their lives to be miserable. I wanted them gone. It was as soon as kindergarten had ended when my wish came true. I was perched on these steps outside, practicing ballet in the long metal banister that ran up the steps. The wind whispered as snow fell like confetti on my red, woolly hat. I had been practicing in an attempt to convince my mom to let me go to ballet. I remember it being freezing cold. I wore my thick pink parka over my mom's dress, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't expecting the snow, and sure, I had been delighted at first, but there was only so much you could do on your own in the snow. I had been staring at the untouched snow which had fallen while I was inside. These swirling, white and the lush grass collided. The shrubs and trees were stained with white, turning Parksville Kindergarten into a winter wonderland. The ground was as smooth as a cake and the snow fell like icing powder. The snow had begun falling during nap time, and we had all awoken to a surprise. But the other kids had friends to have snowball fights with. I had considered joining in, but they wouldn't include me. Not after the stunt that I had pulled before nap time. Still though, I didn't care. I opened my mouth and let flakes land on my tongue. Mom was late again. She was always late, and normally it didn't matter. I would sit in Miss Morris's classroom or go exploring, looking for buried treasure in my imagination. But not that day. I didn't want to go into Miss Morris's classroom. Every time that I thought about it, I felt sick to my stomach. I was tired, I was cold, and every car that went past that wasn't my mom's was sending my heart into my throat. I sat down with a huff. The last vestiges of the setting sun disappeared over the horizon, the copper hues giving way to a dusty purple. scattered with the occasional glitter of a faraway star. The distant skyline stood silhouetted against a velvety sky. The snowfall seemed to get heavier, an array of dancing flakes in front of me, and I wrapped my arms around my legs, burying my head into my lap. I didn't understand. Connor, my brother, and I were in the same class, and I had been sure that I had spotted Mom carting Connor through the crowd of kids and parents. So where was she? Sniffling, I buried my head further into the soft material of my parka. A lashing sheet of wind blew into me, stinging my cheeks. It was so cold, and the cold was cruel, I remember thinking. It was cruel when nobody wanted to play. Footsteps made me jump. "Claire, what on earth are you doing?" Snapping my head up, I broke out into a smile at the sight of her in front of me. My mom wrapped in a black coat, her hair pulled into its usual bun. She hadn't forgotten about me after all. Mom sighed. She had that look again. The expression when she was looking at me, not Connor. "What are you doing out here? Claire, you're going to catch a cold." "Sorry, Mom," I said, wrapping my arms around my mother. She was so warm, and I leached onto that heat, the sense of security. Mom was quick to pull away. "Where's your bag?" I didn't want to say that I had left it in the classroom because Mom would make me go and get it, and I really didn't want to go back into the classroom. "Go and get it, Claire. That bag was a lot of money." Mom shoved me gently up the steps and I stumbled. "Go on, I'll be right here. Hurry up, it's cold." Would she though? It wouldn't be the first time Mom had left me for hours. I almost asked, but found myself stumbling back up the steps and janking open the doors of Parksville's kindergarten. It was better not to argue with Mom, but I really didn't want to tell her how much I didn't want to go back in. Something had been bugging me ever since I had stepped out into the cold, into the snow hitting me in the face. I didn't want to go back. The words were rooted inside of my head and they wouldn't go away. I didn't want to go back. I wouldn't go back, ever. The building was scarier in the dark. I curled into myself, taking deep breaths so I wouldn't cry. The lights were still on, but the corridor was still empty and eerie. The only sound was the tap-tap-tap of a leaky pipe. My classroom was all the way at the end of the hall. I walked faster, keeping my gaze on paintings on the walls done by kids. They made me feel a little bit better. Someone had drawn a smiling sun that I was frowning at a particular painting which was a mess of rainbow scribbles, when the doors at the end of the corridor flew open, making me jump. I steeled myself, clenching my fists. I wasn't scared. I continued walking, the milk from earlier climbing up my throat. There were figures coming down the corridor, silhouettes dancing across the walls. I recognized one of them. The familiar brunette bob swam into view and I relaxed. Miss Morris. I opened my mouth to greet the teacher, but the woman looked to be in a hurry. Behind her were three men that I didn't know. They didn't look like teachers. They were dressed all in black, identical expressions pasted on their faces. "Hurry up," Miss Morris hissed, before her gaze finally found me. "Claire." Her smile was different. It wasn't the one that I remembered. "Your bag is in the classroom." I nodded, but my throat was dry. "Okay," I whispered and quickened my pace. Miss Morris broke into a power walk, and I flinched slowly, turning around. I couldn't help it. 200,000, all right, in cash. Miss Morris didn't sound like her usual self. One of the men grunted in reply. "That's right, they're in high demand." "By whom?" Miss Morris hissed. "You know, their parents," he grumbled. "Work it out." The teacher must have noticed me still hovering, but I couldn't move. "Claire, sweetie, and go and get your bag." "Who's the kid?" Miss Morris snorted. "Not for sale, Rick." spinning around so fast that my head spun. I stared at my sparkly shoes until I had reached the end of the corridor. Reaching out a shaking hand, I pushed the door to my classroom open and I hurried in. I spotted my bright yellow bag on the carpet and I rushed over, grabbing it. But as I was shouldering it, a sharp cry rang out, shattering my ears. I froze, tightening my fingers around my backpack strap. I knew that cry. Before I could stop myself, I was rushing back out into the corridor, blinking in the bright lights. They had been switched back on. For a moment, there was just white light, before my vision cleared. At the end of the hall, a small girl looked to be holding hands with one of these strange men. The girl looked frenzied, blue eyes wide, lips twisted into a silent cry. Lizzie had changed into a pink pastel sweater and jeans, a matching coat flung over the top. Her tiara was still sitting on her head of blonde curls, but she didn't look like a princess anymore. The girl was yanking on the man's hand, but he kept a tight grasp on her. I swallowed thickly. The only man who was allowed to pick up Lizzie was her father, and that man was definitely not her dad. Miss Morris was holding the door open for them and seemed unfazed by the girl's soft squeaks. The stranger, clinging onto the blonde, let out a loud laugh. "Just this one. Boss wants all three of them." Miss Morris scoffed. I slipped behind the door, my chest heaving. I have never seen my teacher look so evil, like a real evil witch. Miss Morris's voice was harsh and cutting, sending shivers slipping down my spine. "Harper and Salmon are in the truck, Rick. Now don't be a funny guy. Just take them and leave my name out of it." I started to tremble. Nick and Felix, I wouldn't believe that. I wouldn't believe that Miss Morris wanted to hurt them. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. Where was my mom? I thought desperately. Why wasn't she coming for me? "Claire." Miss Morris's voice sent shockwaves through me and I jumped up, following the teacher's voice. "What are you doing?" I didn't want the same thing to happen to me. "My mommy's outside," I choked out. Miss Morris nodded. "Okay, well, hurry along. I'm sure that she's waiting." Her gaze snapped to Elizabeth and the strange man. "I'm afraid Lizzie's mother is sick, so she sent Elizabeth's uncle to pick her up." I nodded stiffly, stuffing my trembling hands in my pocket. "Hi, Lizzie." The girl looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "Hi, Claire," she whimpered, despite the fear cracking in her eyes. The blonde shot me a broken smile. "I'm sorry for calling you a witch." I smiled, clutching my backpack. "It's okay." And then I couldn't help it. The words were like barf. "Where are you going?" The girl risked a look at the man gripping her hand. "I don't know." The girl let out a breath. "Miss Morris, I don't think." "You're going with your Uncle Rick, Elizabeth," Miss Morris said firmly. The strange man chortled. "I'm your uncle, right, Lizzie?" I saw the moment the man squeezed the girl's hand so hard that she squeaked, tears running down her cheeks. "Yes," Elizabeth breathed, hiccuping. "Yes, you're my uncle." "Well, I'm glad that's sorted out," Miss Morris chuckled. "Claire, go and see your mother. It's freezing outside." It was more of an order than a suggestion, and I found myself being escorted back into the cold. I wanted to stay. I wanted to make sure that Lizzie was okay, but my teacher's voice was firm. "Wait," Elizabeth squeaked, but whatever the girl had said was drowned out by the wind roaring in my ears. The door slammed behind me before I could turn back, before I could shout back. The snowfall was harsh now, a swirling storm of silver hitting me in the face, but the cold barely fazed me. I stayed frozen on top of the steps. Lizzie's cry still reverberated in the back of my skull. I didn't dare turn back. The man was Elizabeth's uncle. I whispered to myself. He wasn't a stranger. Not a stranger danger. He was her uncle. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about the man's words. Harper and Salmon are in the truck. And then I twisted around, scanning the streets. No sign of a truck. And no sign of my mom either. It was so dark. I shivered, blinking into the blackness. I was disoriented, stumbling down the first few steps. The sky above stretched on for what felt like forever, an endless pool of oblivion. There were no stars, and there were always stars, but not that night. I couldn't see a single one. "Mom," I cried, shielding my face from the onslaught of snow. "Mommy." My mother was nowhere to be seen, which meant there was nobody to tell that Lizzie was with a stranger. I knew what stranger danger was. Miss Morris had been strict about us talking to strangers. So why was she letting Lizzie go with the strange man claiming to be her uncle? And why did she ask the man for money? The wish that I had made hit me hard, like something being slammed into my gut. I wished a real dragon would come and swoop them up, taking them far, far away. Did I do this? That's what I thought, starting to panic. I had done it. My wish had come true, and they really were being taken away. Right then, my biggest problem was that my mother had gone, slipping into the dark, bleeding into the snowfall. My next shriek was strangled at the back of my throat. My teeth chattered despite efforts to clamp my mouth shut. I don't know how long I stood there, staring absently at the flurry of snow as it fell in front of me, twirling around me like fairy dust. I watched headlights fly by, but they were in long intervals, and by the time the third car had passed, my toes were numb. What was I waiting for? I kept wondering. Was I waiting for my mom or Lizzie? Parksville's kindergarten was located on a quiet road right at the edge of our town, so these streets were desolate. The only sign of life was a black cat darting across the road, its tiny paws making prints in the blanket of white. I was bending over, trying to beckon the cat over, making noises, when the doors finally flew open. I panicked, stumbling into the shadows. It was dark, I told myself. They couldn't see me. It was dark. They couldn't see me. It was dark and they couldn't see me. Trembling, I backed into a wall, pressing myself against the harsh brick. There were streetlights outside the door, illuminating the blizzard still swirling around. Lizzie was out first. She was still holding her uncle's hand. The girl was no longer crying, shuffling along. Her eyes stuck to the ground, blonde hair hanging in front of her face. Miss Morris stayed at the entrance, watching the two of them descend. She didn't say anything, only watched as the stranger pulled the girl down the steps. The teacher hovered in the doorway for a moment, before shutting the door. As soon as they were on their own, Lizzie started to cry. "Where's my mommy?" she said softly. "Are you taking me to her?" "Yeah, sure," the stranger chuckled, yanking on the girl's arm. "Come on." "But..." The blonde stumbled over her own feet, staggering. "Where are we going?" "Home. Now shut up." I didn't wait for my mom. I don't know what possessed me to go directly into danger, but I was following them, keeping my distance. The snow got worse, cruelly slamming into me, but it kept me anchored. It was almost up to my ankles. The stranger pulled Lizzie down the sidewalk and I stumbled after them. I wasn't used to going places without my mom. Everything was new to me. I just remember darkness. I remember falling over myself and jumping back up, forcing myself further and further. It wasn't until the stranger was sticking his keys into the lock of a scary-looking black van, when reality had started to hit me. I really had done this. They were going to take Lizzie, the class princess, away. I started to cry, hysterical sobs racking my chest. I slapped a hand over my mouth to keep quiet. The stranger didn't hear me. He dragged Lizzie to the back. The blonde shook her head. "No," she said. No, I don't want to go in there. The stranger laughed out loud. I think you've got a choice, little brat. He spat before unlocking the door. He wrapped his arms around the girl and lifted her, kicking and squealing into the van. I felt myself fall back and I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen. I watched the stranger as he rounded the front of his van, jumping in the front seat. And then, without even thinking, I was running towards the back. The keys were still in the back and I stood on my tiptoes. I twisted the key and a loud click sounded. The door creaked open, and I found myself staring at 3 frightened faces illuminated in harsh light. Lizzie, Felix, and Nick. The boys were shivering without a coat, Lizzie holding onto them for dear life, her arms wrapped around them. For a moment, I was speechless, and they were too. They were staring at me, their teeth chattering, eyes wide. Claire! Nick blinked rapidly, his voice choked up. Before I could reply, the engine started, and the 3 of them were vaulting to their feet and diving out, almost knocking me over. I followed, but it was too dark. I fell to my knees with a gasp, but I hit snow, not concrete. It was so cold. I was screaming, but my cry wasn't hitting the sound barrier. A warm hand grabbed mine and pulled me up. Nick. He dragged me and we were running and sniffling, the 2 of us lunging after the others. We made it behind a car and I was gasping for breath. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how to tell them that I had been the one to wish them away. It was all my fault. But when I looked up to tell them, they were giggling, their laughter creating wisps of white in the air. They were hugging and laughing and sobbing, and talking over one another. The cold slithered into every inch of my being. I wrapped my arms around myself and I watched. Still speechless, the 4 of us watched the van speed off from the safety of the dark, with the back door flapping open. When it was gone, Lizzie detached herself from the boys and pulled me into a hug. I remember that her hair smelled like pineapples. When she pulled away, her smile was bright. She pulled off her tiara and handed it to me. I couldn't resist a cry. Your crown. Have it. Lizzie fitted it wonkily on the top of my head. You saved us from the evil witch. Lizzie was breathless and Nick and Felix joined in and I choked at my apology. When I was tightening my grip around them, I started to wonder if maybe it wasn't me. Maybe cruel things just happened, like my mom leaving me and evil teachers. I'll do it again, I said, my voice breaking. I'll always save you from the evil witches. Promise? Nick murmured, Felix mumbling his affirmation. I nodded. I promise. I would like to say that I was right, but then I wouldn't be here writing this now. Ever since that incident, our town has been relentlessly cruel to Lizzie, Felix, and Nick, and I know that I am that reason. I've been there, or I've tried to be there every time. I was there when we were 10 years old, and the strangers broke into Nick's house. I managed to call the police, but only just. I was there when someone spiked Lizzie's drink at a party, when they took her upstairs. I was there when Felix jumped into the back of an Uber that I knew was going to kill him. At our high school graduation, I couldn't find them after the ceremony. I had been following them around the whole time because I knew something was wrong. Months had gone by without something bad happening, without my childhood wish trying to seal their fate once again. I found them in an abandoned warehouse after tracking down Lizzie's phone. Still in their graduation gowns, they were tied back to back, duct tape around their mouths. Hey, I was a natural at saving them by that point. It was like second nature. I knew how to untie impossible knots and how to check for breathing. I knew exactly what had happened to them. A forced OD, by someone who didn't have a reason for hurting them. I managed to untie them, dragging him into the sunlight and calling the police. Felix's words still haunt my mind. When I ripped off the tape of his mouth, his half-lidded eyes when he spat saliva down my own graduation gown. "Why?" he croaked. "Why is it always you?" "Yeah," Nick whispered into concrete. "You. It's always you." Lizzie didn't say anything, but I know she was thinking the same. People worked like my personal soldiers, my childhood wish of puppeteering them. They're not going to stop until the three of them are dead, and I still don't know how to tell them that it's my fault. It's been 7 days since our graduation ceremony. I'm waiting for something bad to happen to them. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am a witch.